keeps pointing to a clearly losing move and calling it a winning move, doesn't matter. Those are the people that I'm saying you can disregard. If we've identified that a move is obviously losing, if we've identified that killing another person just because they spit on your face is a bad moral action, anybody who says that it's okay to do that can be disregarded. We've settled that problem. We've solved it. We're not saying that their opinion is no longer valid in a broad realm of ideas. We're talking about with respect to this specific situation, you no longer matter if you're going to keep holding that position until you do one of a couple different things. One is to demonstrate why your position is correct, is moral, has a benefit, does something productive for society. So when I talk about, a minute ago, the fact that secular morality is a natural evolving process, what do I mean? It means from very simple beginnings, we're able to construct a complex, robust, dynamic moral system. And what simple beginnings do we tend to work with? McDonald's. Life is generally preferable to death. Pleasure is generally preferable to pain. Benefit is generally preferable to harm. And we can begin building. Now, there are exceptions to each of those, usually when those are in conflict. There are a number of other possible core values that you can begin with when you talk about bettering the society, but we can begin with those. It may be the case that death may be preferable to life when continuing that life causes pain or harm, or when it saves a life considered more valuable by the individual. We live in a complicated world, and even the most basic values are going to conflict and place us in the position of waiting. As our understanding increases, we build a pool of situations to consider. And some complicate the landscape initially, and some clarify other decisions. One big advantage of secular moral systems is that the old rules can be updated with new rules. By contrast, non-secular moral systems, as we've already talked about, are typically restricted in their ability to evolve at all. I'm not advocating specific moral positions when I use these as examples, although I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many people who would disagree with these as kind of general guidelines, along with things like individual freedom, the ability of each and every person to satisfy their own desires within the limits of a cooperative society, recognizing that my freedoms and rights end where somebody else's start. But we can build off what we've learned. We can take the greatest thoughts from wherever they find them, whether it's in a religion or in a secular line of thought, and we can get rid of the baggage and the garbage. That's the other negative aspect of non-secular moralities, is they don't have a good mechanism for getting rid of the garbage, which is why you have the Catholic Church, and this isn't a moral issue either, but it's about doctrine, getting rid of limbo, eventually. Making apologies to Galileo 400 years afterwards, that type of thing. There's no quick and easy mechanism for them. And by the way, in a secular system, it's not necessarily always quick and easy either. But there is a mechanism there, and it's data-driven. As I've noted elsewhere, we've got the ability to assess actions and their results with respect to goals. Outliers can be safely regarded until they demonstrate the efficacy of their values. It doesn't make us closed-minded to dismiss the KKK's views on human rights. If anything, it makes us responsible. In situations where we cannot properly evaluate an action to determine its moral values, we fall back to the foundational values of the system. One of the primary is that the fundamental freedom of the individual is paramount. There are two ways of looking at rights. Either we have only the rights that we explicitly enumerate, or we have every right except for the ones we specifically restrict. The former throttles liberty and mires us in bureaucracy and fascism. The latter exalts liberty and allows us to avoid anarchy. But wait a minute, by what right do you dismiss the KKK's views on human rights? By the same criteria that I disregard anything else. It's not simply a matter of, I don't like your bigotry, go away, which could be fine if you're just trying to shorthand it and you don't feel like actually debating it. It's, you haven't demonstrated that your views contribute to the betterment of society in any recognizable way. You haven't demonstrated that your core values represent an improvement. And I have evidence that demonstrates that what you're pushing is not the type of society that we want. And that's the extent of being able to eliminate these outliers for issues that we've resolved and get on with it. Now back to not moving. So what kind of world do you want to live in? Most people tend to object to the government making and imposing laws on what you can do in the privacy of your own home. Not everybody, but most people. Yet that's the same sort of externally imposed system that non-secular moral systems tend to be. What kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world that values freedom, societal health, physical, mental, emotional? Do we want to live in a society that encourages opportunity, fair competition, open exchange of ideas? Do we want to live in a society that prospers without doing so at the expense of its citizens? Do we prefer a democracy to a dictatorship? What sort of limits should we impose when it comes to extending our moral views onto others? Those are hard questions that we're not going to address in here because we're talking about the system at a meta level. We have to get past the first step before we can actually start addressing the others. It's a lot of complex questions that we need to address as our planet moves forward. And we do ourselves and future generations a great disservice if we jump into these issues with an inferior system, and we do a greater disservice by denying that this trend is occurring in order to cling to our treasured traditions as the non-secular moral systems do. So, I told you you'd sense a trend because it's pretty much a simple internal-external comparison, and I don't think any of you need to see the following slide, which changes them to democracy and dictatorship. We have the tools that we need, and we should continue to use them. A secular moral system is one that is free from appeals to external authorities. It is robust, inclusive. It is a powerful tool that has been evolving and improving with each new nugget of understanding that we gain. Earlier, I said that I hoped anyone would and should agree that secular morals are superior, and in fact, they already do. Individuals who ostensibly reject secular moral systems in favor of one of the more traditional non-secular moral systems implicitly recognize and acknowledge the superiority of secular moral systems. And you can tell this by both their actions and by comparing their actual values with the traditional values associated with their particular religion. None of them are advocating slavery in the way that their books do. None of them are advocating the same positions with respect to women that their books do. Some of them are still tied up on the women thing, some of them are still tied up on the sexuality thing. But by and large, we see that the values that most people have, even when they claim they're adhering to a religious system, are influenced and have been changed by secular values that directly contradict what the traditional views of their organization are. That is a bald-faced admission that their system is inferior to a secular system. Many religious individuals and groups have modified their personal sense of morality away from the foundations of their religion and realign themselves with the values encouraged by secular progressives. They have, for all intents and purposes, adopted the views of a secular system while clinging to the foundation and rationalizing it away with personal interpretations. They have, in a very real sense, adopted a secular moral system as a new external source for their morality. They're so rigidly stuck in this idea that it needs to come from outside that they don't even realize that when they make changes, they're taking it from outside. We need to show people that they do not have to be stealth secularists. They can actually join in and participate. They can be proud of their participation and directly benefit from their contributions rather than standing in opposition to the very values they secretly embrace. Secular moral systems are inclusive. The authority comes from within. The focus is on improvement. It's based on our interests, and the authority is based directly on a demonstration that the results meet the goals. Secular moral systems are superior because we say so. And when because I say so was an unsatisfying answer, because we say so is an immensely satisfying answer. Because I say so doesn't impart any understanding at all. Because we say so is the product of understanding. It is the demonstration of understanding. Because I say so is some hollow assertion. Because we say so is an empowering statement. We need not make appeals to the unknown. We should not opt for the lazy, unthinking path. We cannot afford to struggle against progress in order to embrace antiquated ideals. We are intelligent, empathetic, compassionate beings, and we have the ability to set goals and solve problems. We've been doing it for as long as we've had the capacity for thought, and we continue to get better at it. The fact that we're not yet perfect at it doesn't cripple us. It drives us, because the goals of a secular morality include the goal of getting better and getting better. There should be no question that this method is superior. And it's time we stopped allowing ourselves to get mired in fallacious appeals to ignorance and authority, and simply continue to get on with the business of building a better world. Thank you. Now I'll stop standing on one leg. Yeah.
Early on, you mentioned that the only thing you could really look at was behaviors, and that your thoughts were something that maybe the thought police would have to deal with.
Yeah.
But then later, when we were comparing the good child and the better child,
Motivations.
yeah, we looked at motivation.
Yeah.
Which,
We're still assessing an action. We are taking in consideration the motivation. When I said when I talked about the thought police, I'm saying that there's no moral assessment of a thought alone. For example, pedophiles. There's nothing at all intrinsically immoral about an individual who is sexually attracted to a child. It's the action that becomes immoral. There has to be some action that impacts somebody besides themselves. It's really largely an irrelevant issue because we can't get into people's heads to see what they're thinking. We can, though, assess what they're thinking with respect to the action to color it, I guess.
well, in that case, like with the pedophile, you might have somebody that had these thoughts but didn't do it because they didn't want to get arrested,
Right.
and another one that didn't do it because realized that this was an abomination,
Right.
and that there was something wrong with them, and they weren't going to do this because it was wrong. And so you would have two actions that were the same, or the two non-actions that were the same, but for different reasons. One would be a moral reason.
Sure. If you looked at an intentional non-action as an action, I guess you could assess it that way too. Although I think generally we would kind of limit how much we worry about that. Because if somebody tells me they didn't punch me in the face because they knew it was the wrong thing to do, I'm not going to give them a whole lot of credit for that. I don't care what their motivation was, I'm just glad they didn't do it.
But that went right back to your two children example. Is one did or didn't do the action good for goodness sake, and the other one did or didn't do the action because they feared for repercussions.
Yeah. Don't know. Generally, I tend to look at it as only assessing actions. I think that you can make a case that we could look at some inactions or intentional inactions as an action. But when I was talking about the